Hello. Welcome to Book Circle Presents An Ever-Mounted Cavalry. I'm Earl Wyenberg. Our hero, Lieutenant Fletcher, and his associate, young Roger Blackholt, a wizard, have located and broken into the Ahnenerbe headquarters where they make all manner of unpleasant monsters for the Nazis. They destroyed the place, and as they were escaping, young Blackholt twisted his ankle, possibly broke it, lamed himself, and to get out of there fast enough, Fletcher has turned himself permanently into a centaur, grabbed young Blackholt, and run. Galloping was different. He could feel his new horse guts slosh back and forth, driving the horse lungs, in turn driving the human lungs. There was a resonance. He was a pendulum, swinging effortlessly, it seemed. He declared himself grateful for it, then gave his attention to not stumbling. And now they were among the enemy. Übersoldaten rushed about them, while normal men in uniforms or lab coats shouted at them and at each other. At a gallop, they were through the Germans in less than a minute. "That looked like a rout," Fletcher remarked. "Our boys!" exclaimed Roger, letting the muffling drop. Men on foot, men on horses, and man-horses came in sight, crashing through the leaves and bracken. Most of the centaurs had riders. Dash, pause to aim, shoot, repeat. Fletcher tried to pick a good time to drop invisibility and avoid being hit by accident. The choice was taken from him. A little group rushed by, a man on a horse, a man on a centaur, led by a wolf. The wolf was solid gray and misty, swinging its head from side to side as it ran, tracking. At the end of one swing, it raised its head and met Fletcher's eyes. "Lieutenant Fletcher?" asked the wolf, puzzled. Fletcher whipped off his Tarnkappa so the men who were not in astral form could also see him. "What are you? You did it!" the wolf stammered. It was Chio's voice. "Yes, I did," Fletcher answered. He hoisted one strap of his backpack. "We have papers and samples here, and we took out their lab." The wolf laughed. The riders grinned. The centaur said, "The prince and the general will want to know. They're that way." He pointed back the way they had come. Fletcher nodded and accelerated. Fletcher trotted up to Prince Hugh and General Fitzsimmons, saluted, and said, "Lieutenant Fletcher reporting, Your Highness." He carefully studied their faces while Roger said, "Corporal Blackholt reporting, Your Highness." After a few seconds' silence, Hugh asked, What happened?" "We needed to make a fast retreat, sir," said Fletcher, "but Corporal Blackholt had an injured foot. Fortunately, he also had a sagitta." You do realize—" "Yes." General Fitzsimmons stopped staring at Fletcher and glanced at the column of smoke rising over the forest. He returned his gaze to Fletcher and said, "Debrief." Prince Hugh raised his hand index finger up. "First, let's get Corporal Blackholt some treatment." "It's just my ankle, sir," Roger said. Fletcher could feel him shifting uneasily on his back. "Broken at worst, maybe just sprained, but I couldn't run." "Still, no need for you to sit there and ache." The prince and the general stood at the center of a cluster of officers, coming and going on horse or on foot or on hoof. The prince gestured, and the corporal found himself being helped off Fletcher by a captain and a major, then hustled away. "Now," said Hugh. He and Fitzsimmons and the lesser brass all gave Fletcher their attention. As he told his tale, his audience kept looking up over his shoulder at the smoke column rising from the trees behind him. Fletcher shifted uneasily and switched his tail. "I was told to use the incendiary grenades on my own judgment, sir," he said, "and I accept responsibility for the decision. I hope no one is going to scold you for sending Rochenau and those SS ghosts on their merry way to hell, Fitzsimmons interrupted, or for incinerating that collection of horrors. As it happens, it worked out well. A useful distraction, Hugh said. When they saw the smoke, Fitzsimmons went on, some large fraction ran back to, I don't know, put the fire out, rescue their infernal experiments and bottled ghosts, whatever. Horrible lack of discipline. That made it much easier for us to mop up the fraction who stayed than chase the fraction that ran and mop them up. That's what's going on now. Hugh said, I was hoping that the Übersoldaten encountered in England were the cream of their crop, the best they had, so we would be facing inferior fighters here. I appear to have had my wish granted. We now think that their well-trained and well-disciplined creatures have already been deployed, and most of the ones here are freshly manufactured. And what they manufacture are basically artificial berserkers. Think of all those extra adrenal glands. The self-discipline has yet to be trained in later, and the ones still here haven't got it yet, we think. Fletcher shuddered. Still nasty to face. Fitzsimmons nodded. To be sure. But once we realized that, we had ways of coping. They're hideously fast, but they're not faster than bullets. One party acts as a stalking horse, forgive the term, and when the berserker attacks, the follow-up party pots them. That's one way. Worked well. How did Corporal Blackholt measure up? Hugh asked. Fletcher glanced over the crowd of men who would determine Roger's career and felt there were questions behind this question. Quite well, he answered firmly. He was brave, resourceful, observant, full of useful information and spells. He bears no responsibility for his injury. Fitzsimmons studied Fletcher with leisurely care, while Hugh asked, So you harbor no resentment for the accident that cost... He trailed off. Everyone could see what it had cost Fletcher. That wouldn't be fair, sir, he replied, still holding his tone firm. As I told Blackholt, I am the fellow who volunteered to be the Enchantress's test subject, and I am the kind of fellow you designed the dedicated cavalry for. I would have gone into the Majory if I'd had the talent rather than the vanguard, and now here I am in the magic. And in the dedicated cavalry, it would appear, Fitzsimmons remarked. Most likely, sir. I don't know that the vanguard will have much further use for me. We will sort all that out later, said Hugh. Thank you, Lieutenant. He gave a dismissive nod. Fletcher saluted and withdrew, backed not easy when you were now quadrupedal. Thank you for what? The report? Putting a good face on his sacrifice? Starting a fire that turned out lucky? It didn't matter. Fletcher moved further away from the front, found a brigadier who was Hugh's aide-de-camp, and turned over the papers and samples. Yet further back, people were calming down still more, and things began to look like a bivouac. He found Brother Eugene bandaging Roger's foot. Not broken, but a right royal sprain, the monk told him, while Roger hissed and winced. He looked Fletcher over. Roger told me, You look exactly as you did with the seaming cloth, which means it's a very good seaming, I suppose. How does it feel? Fletcher noticed Roger stopped wincing to stare at him. I've hardly had time to reflect, he said, but I've noticed some differences. I galloped a bit and felt my guts sloshing as I never did before. Felt my double lungs. That was new. I've bucked and I've reared and I've kicked, all on impulse. Don't believe I'd have done that with just the seaming. He looked past where Brother Eugene sat with Roger's foot in his hands to 3 pack horses picketed among the trees. And like you, even though I was raised among horses, it's suddenly so much easier, more direct to read them. How tired and anxious they were, how resigned to being confused. Brother Eugene nodded. You don't just appear to be half-horse now. You are half-horse, and you chose it. Fletcher nodded. Yes, I was one of the lucky ones. I chose it. Miss Blackholt's quarters in Upham were not nearly as cozy as her house back in Oswick. No rugs, no fireplace, certainly no kitchen with an aga, stacks of crates on their sides for impromptu bookcases, few windows, none with good views. But they were big, big enough to hold an afternoon tea with Miss Blackholt, Ivy, and two men in t-shirts and bathrobes who might expand into centaurs on short notice. Why would this Earl Princess expose herself to fire that way? Ivy asked. Fletcher shrugged. Perhaps she underestimated the range on modern guns, or maybe she's just not used to taking guns into account. And how long will she stay dead? Another unknown. If they find her body, patch it up, and pump in the vis, it will shorten the time, but it varies hugely from fay to fay. The skies were clear for our return because they were out looking for her. The Earl King and his girls do a lot of death-themed magic, said Brother Eugene. That won't help her recovery, from what I understand. Ivy decided she had heard enough about these nasty fays. What do we do next? In the very short term, Miss Blackholt answered, we see how long the seamings last with the new recipe. Over the next few days, we clean up and generally recover. And we means everyone here at the base. Then in the longer run, we move to Stoke Norrie. And now we means you and me, Ivy. Stoke Norrie was a town in Oxfordshire, the secret English capital of Grand Normandy, and the site of Normand House, the English palace, though physically it passed as a big country home. Of course the new court mage would live there. Ivy nodded and stared meditatively into her teacup. You'll sell the house in Oswick? She felt a pang about this, which was silly. It wasn't her house, and she'd only spent a few weeks there. But the time had certainly been special. Miss Blackholt nodded. Probably. Or the Majory will appear to sell it, probably to some relative of mine, and we must consider whether Melissa and the other bees want to stay there or have the hives moved to Stoke Norrie. Oops, here we go, said Fletcher, putting down his plate and stepping away from the table and chairs. In a few seconds, his equine body had erupted out from under the hem of his bathrobe. Miss Blackholt wrote the time down on a notepad by her cup. Very good, almost twice as long as before. She looked expectantly at Brother Eugene. So did Ivy. She reflected that she would miss him and Fletcher much more than the Oswick house. He smiled back at her. Nothing yet. Maybe my metabolism is slower than his because of my age. Miss Blackholt rolled her eyes. Or my concentration was more intense when I cast the spell on your potion, or you have had more practice holding on to the seaming. No telling, really. I'm going with you to Stoke Norrie? Asked Ivy, half wondering if she could stay with Brother Eugene. Certainly, unless the situation at your home has changed and your mother wants you back. Not yet. Anyway, said Fletcher, before you go home you need lessons on how to be sundered in an unsundered society, an unsundered family even. There are tricks and rules of thumb and contacts and such. He gazed at Miss Blackholt. The Majory should pay for that and do the arranging. They are the institution responsible for getting her sundered. There was a knock at the door. Ivy answered, glad to leave behind the roil of emotions these plans kicked up. Leaving her new friends. Being a stranger at home. It was Gerald with his mail pouch. Gerald, it isn't time for delivery. I mean, come in. She looked at Miss Blackholt. Is that all right? Of course. Hello, Ivy, Gerald answered. Thank you, Lieutenant, but I'm doing extra rounds. They said I could. There's a lot of extra mail coming through, so I volunteered. There was a creak in his voice, and his eyes were rimmed red. He was in dress uniform, but also wore a black band around his upper right arm. Here, Ivy, he handed her an envelope. Looking past her, he saw Fletcher, now settled back down on the floor. "Oh, Captain, there's one for you, too." Ivy took it and said, "I'm so sorry, Gerald." "Thank you." He gave her a quick, sharp salute and clattered away down the hall. Ivy watched him go, then shut the door. "Poor little mite," sighed Brother Eugene, "and he is so young. This may be the first death in the family that he has faced." "I suppose it is a good thing in its way," said Miss Blackholt, "that there is someone to mourn Dominic Fitzmichael simply, without swarms of second thoughts." "He left plenty of them," agreed Fletcher. "Should we be glad to have him out of the way, or just be sad he was killed? Was he in any way urged into the thick of that fray? If so, by whom? His family? Elaine or one of his crowd? Someone else? Or did he commit suicide by reckless bravery? Or was it just fortunes of war?" "Well, we can't ask Elaine," Miss Blackholt said. "I suppose someone is wearing mourning for him, or for Fitzallen and Pharamond, but I am sure they will not have any useful information about their deaths." "More questions," noted Fletcher. "I can't say I care as much about the answers." "Here we go," said Brother Eugene, standing and transforming in his turn. Miss Blackholt noted the time. Ivy and Fletcher opened their letters. "What does yours say?" asked Eugene of Fletcher, who had merely glanced at it. "What I expected. I am transferred to the dedicated cavalry, and they confirm my new rank." "Congratulations again, Captain," said Miss Blackholt, smiling. "Your turn will come, I'm sure," he replied. "It won't really matter once you're court mage, but it'll look better if you step into the position from a higher rank. Not that you haven't earned it, of course, with all your work on these seamings." Though currently centaur, he gestured down at his recently human body. "If they ever do want to use centaurs in the vanguard or any other sneaky way, this will be invaluable. And it's nice to revisit toes." "I will keep working to make the seaming less fragile," she promised. "Captaincy for you, I think," pursued Fletcher. "That will look about right. A respectable rank, and the promotion isn't artificially meteoric." "May we know what is in your letter, Ivy?" Miss Blackholt asked. Ivy had 2 envelopes in her hand and was staring at 2 pieces of paper. She looked stunned. It's from my mom, and she sent a letter from Dad to me. Dad's coming home." But she did not smile. "What is it?" asked Brother Eugene. "Is he injured?" asked Fletcher. "He lost a leg, his right leg. That's why he's coming home. Dad says it's not the whole leg, really, just the foot. He says he's lucky he gets to keep the knee. He sent the same to Mom, and she said that it isn't her idea of luck. I don't know what to think." "It sounds like your father is trying to be optimistic," Fletcher noted. "Mom's like me. She doesn't know where she is, she says. He's coming home safe, but maimed." "It is certainly a misfortune," Brother Eugene agreed. "But your father is right. It's much worse to lose the knee." Ivy gazed pleadingly at Miss Blackholt. "Is there any magic that—" Miss Blackholt shook her head. "I'm so sorry, Ivy. Nothing I can do. If I had such power over living bodies, I would be able to undo the centaur spell." "But we will help as we can," Brother Eugene promised. Then, more subdued, "however that might be." "Seamings," said Miss Blackholt resolutely. "I was wrong to say I could do nothing. I cannot restore the foot, but we do put seamings on prosthetics." Ivy brightened. "But," said Fletcher, "to be fitted with a magic prosthetic, your father would have to be sundered, and your mother too, almost certainly." "Which would put them in the same danger you are in," Fletcher said. Ivy waited for the sentence of advice, but there was silence. All the grown-ups were looking at her. "Your father cannot be asked if he wants to be sundered," Fletcher pointed out. Once you know it's a real possibility, you are sundered. So it's up to you, Ivy, said Miss Blackholt, whether to sunder your family or not. Ivy looked to Brother Eugene, who smiled back. Whatever you decide, he told her, I am sure your family are in good hands. The end.